Members, we have reached the appointed hour and a quorum has been formed. May I now start the procedure for the election of chairman of the Bills Committee. Please refer to 21E and Appendix 4 of the rules. We need nominations. A nomination must be made by a member orally and seconded by another member. Can we have nominations here? Mr. William Kwok-Kim. Mr. Stephen Ho is nominated. Do you accept it? Do we have a seconder? Mr. Yu Si-wing seconds the nomination, and so has Mr. Christopher Chung. Do we have another nomination? No? Okay, congratulations. You are elected as chairman unopposed. Please come on to the stage. Thank you for your support. A question for members. Do we need to elect a deputy chairman for the Bills Committee? No? Oh, okay. Please invite the officials to come in. I would like to welcome Mr. Laurie Low, Deputy Secretary for Home Affairs, Ms. Grace Lee, Principal Assistant Secretary for Home Affairs, and Mr. Jonathan Look, Government Counsel, Law Drafting Division, Department of Justice, as well as Ms. Brenda Low from the CPC. Over to you, Mr. Low, for an introduction. We propose some legislative amendments to the CPC ordinance and also the relevant subsidiary legislation, the CPC rules, so as to relax certain rules. There are certain restrictions currently in force in respect of the columbarium and cemeteries, so that we can make the best use, optimum use of the land available. As we know that in Hong Kong, there is a growing demand for cemeteries and columbarium niches. So we believe there's room to make certain amendments, rules which were made in the past, which may not be in keeping with the current times. It may five major issues here. Some outdated restriction. For example, what kind of cemeteries, lots will be and lots will be available, and also the definition of close family members, and who would be allowed to be buried or deposited in existing cemetery slots. We want to make more people qualify so that family lots can be better utilized. Actually, the CPC has two types of lots. One are permanent, the other are time limited. The families in the past were find it easier to have more family members buried in those lots, but not those time-limited lots. So we are talking about exhumable lots. We want to relax the rules regarding exhumable lots so that they can be allowed to accommodate deceased family members. When the time expired, and if the families does not exhume the laws, the CPC can step in and do it. But the bones so the exhumed cannot be cremated by CPC under current rules. We want to make some amendments so that after the CPC has, or the board of CPC has exercised due diligence to locate the family members of the deceased, it would be empowered to cremate the unclaimed remains. At present, the CPC would have to find rooms for such unclaimed human remains, and the space requirement is bigger. If cremation is allowed, then we can make better use of available space. And also that there is also currently a restriction on the maximum number of sets of ashes that could be deposited in a niche. We make reference to the recent relaxation of FEHD, so that if the family would like to put more sets of ashes in a niche, CPC would be allowed. And at present, CPC can donate money out of the accumulated funds of CPC for certain charitable purposes. But such charitable activities are restricted to those that would benefit the local Chinese people, person of the Chinese race only. We believe there is a room to relax the scope so that any charity operating for the benefit of the community of Hong Kong or particular sector of that community would be eligible to receive donations from CPC board. So these are the 5 amendments. Actually, there was a discussion at the Home Affairs panel, and at that meeting, the members gave their support to the proposed amendments. So I appeal to members to give their support to the current bill. Thank you. The floor is now open for questions. Who would like to ask questions? Mr. Wong Kok Heng and Mr. Ma Fung Kwok, 2 members so far. So I would say that let's give 5 minutes for each member. Mr. Wong Kok Heng, I welcome the first amendment and the 4th amendment. Of course, I support other amendments as well.
我就想問一問政府當局。
With regard to the 1st and the 4th amendments, that is the relaxation of the definition of close family members. Is the definition aligned with that adopted by the FEHD for public columbarium that would reduce public confusion. Both organizations are serving the public. I don't want to have two systems in the management of niches. And the Second Amendment is about removing the restriction on the maximum number of sets of ashes that can be deposited in a niche. Again, are you aligning your practice with that of FEHD? Because FEHD also allows applications for additional sets of ashes to be deposited. They are very relaxed about this, as long as you can accommodate the additional sets within the allocated space, it will be approved. So my question is, are the standards that you are going to adopt the same as those of the FEHD? I'll take the second question, and that is the maximum number of sets of ashes that can be deposited in a niche. I would say basically our standards are the same as those of FEHD, and that is to say there's no so-called upper limit. You can deposit as many sets as you can. After the current relaxation is passed, there will be no maximum number set. But in the Home Affairs panel discussion, some members were of the view that they might be concerned if there's no maximum number set. So although we don't propose any such maximum number of sets, we would give the board of CPC to have the power to decide on a cap. So there's no so-called numerical upper limit, but to address members' concern expressed previously, we have given an additional power to the board of CPC to impose one. As for the definition of family members, FEHD, as I understand it, does not have any strict requirement on the relationship between the first disease and subsequent family members. But there are two kinds of niches, for families and secondly for individuals. But the rule is that the first set of ashes must remain there, but an application can be made for subsequent or more sets to be deposited.
For family niches, and because the CPC would like to promote the values of the traditional family values. So for family niches, they adopt the definition of a relative, although it's quite broad, but anyway, it covers members of the family. It can cover the grandparents, great-grandparents, and also the brothers and sisters of great-grandparents, and also siblings, and also close relatives. But if the person is not related to the family at all, then his niches or his ashes cannot be deposited in the niche. There are 240,000 niches, and of them, 190,000 are ordinary niches with no restriction. But for family niches, CPC would like very much to adopt the definition of relative, albeit it is quite a broad definition. With regard to the maximum number of sets of ashes, because the CPC is dealing with it, can CPC respond to Mr. Wang's question? Please be quick. With regard to the size of the niches, whether it is consistent with the FEHDs, yes, I can say in the affirmative. For ordinary niches, the dimension is like that of the standard niches of FEHD. And we have another type of niche, which is with a size equivalent to their large niche. For ordinary niches, we can accommodate 2 sets of niches, ashes, and for family niches, we can accommodate 4 sets of ashes. Now, after the amendment of the ordinance or the bill, if the person chooses to deposit more, then, well, they can have this choice. Chairman, I hope that the administration can take reference from the approach adopted by FEHD for public columbarium. I have several reasons. First, for CPC, its land comes from the government and the public as well. And the chairman of the CPC board of management is actually the Secretary for Home Affairs. He is a government officer too. So directly and indirectly, the board is managed by the government. So let's not have 2 systems. Since the FEHD has relaxed its definition on close relatives, and there is no limit on the maximum number of sets of ashes, so the CPC should do the same. Now, the government says that it is delegating the authority to the CPC, but anyway, the CPC is headed by a government officer. So let's not have 2 systems. Let's be consistent. So I would like to put that on record. So please, members and government officials, please do not speak in a cocktail mode because it will create difficulties for the interpreters. Next one, Mr. Ma Fong Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to ask about human remains which are unclaimed. Now, the present proposal is that the CPC can cremate these remains. Now, I would like to know what's the situation at present. Now, you say that after the term has expired, you would disinter the human remains and then put it in a communal grave. And you said that the space for the communal grave will be exhausted in 10 years' time. What about the situation at present? Every year, how many human remains have reached their term of expiry and how many remain unclaimed? What's the number? And what's the unallocated number of niches which can be used for such a purpose? Now, normally descendants won't like not to reclaim the human remains. They may not do so because they may not be contacted and so on. So how is the CPC dealing with that? Would you be keeping accurate contact details of those people involved? And if you can't get in touch with these people, why is that the case? Now, if the human remains have been cremated and the descendants would like to reclaim the ashes, how are the procedures like? Deputy Secretary, I agree with the members' remarks. According to CPC's records, if there is a term of expiry for the grave space, normally the family members will come and disinter the human remains and deal with the human remains. From 2008 to 2012, a total of 14,500 grave spaces have reached the end of their term, and for those unclaimed human remains, there are only 35 sets which are unclaimed over a period of 5 years. But the number fluctuates from year to year. So if we go by that ratio, The CPC now has auxiliary niches for such unclaimed ashes. Well, around 100 niches are used for that purpose, for storing unclaimed ashes. So if we say that 8 to 10 go unclaimed, so we make a calculation. So if the situation persists, then in 10 years' time, the existing auxiliary niches will be exhausted. With regard to the ashes, after we've done the cremation, how we deal with the ashes, as what the paper sets out, after the cremation, they will not be disposed recklessly. We will be storing them properly. We just want to them to take up less space, and we will have a proper written record system so that family members may reclaim the cremated ashes even after a long time. Perhaps I will defer to the executive director of CPC to give you the details of this, how the system works in the future. Mr. Low, please. Thank you. We would deal with the ashes properly. There would be a number assigned to the different sets of ashes, and in our computer record system, there will be details on the deceased persons and related information, and we would store all these information and properly. And the ashes will be stored properly, probably at junk bay. There will be a special space for that purpose. Thank you. Mr. Ma Fung Kwok, any follow-up question? No, I don't think I have the time. Next one, Mr. Yip Kwok Him. Thank you, Chairman. I'm concerned about several issues. First, you talk about close relative. You made some refinement on the definition. You say that the reference to his wife will be replaced by the spouse. What is the reason for doing so? Would you be doing the same for, say, his husband will be replaced by the spouse, or her husband, rather, will be replaced by the spouse? Secondly, for unclaimed human remains or ashes, to my understanding, well, in fact, there is another piece of bill which is being scrutinized now, and that has to do with the columbarium bill. And you would be asking the FVHD to deal with it. That will not be the case, right? It will be the CPC which is dealing with the unclaimed ashes. You will not be handing over the job to another government department. Can you confirm that? And also, when the ashes or human remains are unclaimed, you say that you will cremate the human remains. What about the costs? Will you be recovering the costs from those who are reclaiming it in the future? Because you say that there will be a fee involved. Last question. You are expanding the scope of donation. You said that now it's for the benefit of persons of the Chinese race in Hong Kong, and you would like to change it for the benefit of the community of Hong Kong or a particular sector of that community. Can you say something more about that? What do you mean by particular sector of that community? Can you give me some examples? Why you just stop at the community of Hong Kong, and why the special mention about the particular sector of that community? Deputy Secretary, let me take the last two questions first because they're relatively simpler. Why do we want to change the scope for donation? Now, it says that the donation will just be for the benefit of persons of the Chinese race in Hong Kong. The scope is too narrow. I agree with Mr. Yip that, well, we can just say that it's just for the benefit of the community of Hong Kong, and that's enough. But we want to be more careful. Say, for example, for a charitable organization, it just works for the benefit of the elderly people. Now, if we just say that it's for the benefit of the community of Hong Kong, then that people may query whether elderly people will come under that definition. So we would like to add in the phrase particular sector of that community. So that's the reason why we add in that phrase. So because there are different types of charitable organizations, some bodies may be working for people with a certain disease, with a certain handicap or situation, and other bodies may be working for the benefit of the entire community. So we want to target both. So that's the reason for the revision. Now, as for the cremation of unclaimed human remains, which is a body which will be responsible for dealing with the ashes, well, it will be the CPC which is ultimately responsible. It doesn't have any plan to hand the ashes over to the FEHD. As what Mr. Low said, that they have good storage system, good labeling system, so that people can reclaim the ashes later on. Yes, costs are involved. If the descendants reclaim the ashes later, they will be asked to pay for the cremation costs. Now, to your question about why replacing the words his wife by the spouse, let's go back to the 70s. Well, at that time, we set down certain rules. They may sound very outdated to today's minds. Well, at that time, the married women were considered family members of their husband's family. So their close relatives are really the relatives of their husband's families. So if a person of Chinese race and his wife and his children are qualified to be buried into CPC's graves space. Now, if we stick to his wife, then there will be restrictions. If this woman of Chinese race marries to an expatriate person, now under the present definition, that other person cannot be buried together with the women. So we think that we have to do away with the restriction. So we want to replace the words with the spouse and then do away with all these confusing terms. A follow-up. You mentioned about the particular sector of that community. I don't think that the words used here are very good. Perhaps when we go to the clause-by-clause scrutiny, we can dwell further on that phrase. I don't think your expression can cope with the situation you mentioned. I don't think that phrase works for the purpose that you intend to be put in place. Mr. Raymond Chan, I support the overall directions of amending the ordinance, and that is doing away with the maximum number of sets of ashes and also relaxing the definition of relative and making more people eligible for CPC burial grounds. Now, I would like to ask a question on comparing the public columbarium and CPC columbarium. For public columbarium, now, is there any restriction on the subsequent burials or deposit of ashes into the same niche? For the 190,000 niches run by the CPC, are they subject to the same restrictions as that for FEHD? To my understanding, FEHD does have certain definitions of relatives with regard to the use of niches. These people must be closely related to the deceased persons, but then they are not setting them down in the rules or regulations or an ordinance, and it's up to the director of FEH to make decisions. The difference between their niches is that between their niches and CPC's ordinary niches, then I think the CPC is adopting a more relaxed definition. Now, as long as the first deceased person's niches is still there, and if that the relevant person agrees and is willing to pay a fee, then any other person's niches can be ashes can be put into the niches. Now, for the family niches, and there is indeed a restriction. Well, the FHD's definitions is much more relaxed.
If it's not within the government's gambit, maybe the Secretary can help us to find out the restrictions adopted by FHD. My next question is, of course, whether same-sex couples will be allowed to be deposited in the same niche. If you want to optimize the use of niches, you should have an open mind. We're talking about people who have been living together for 20, 30 years, and they were unable to be registered as couples. If FHD agrees to open up this arrangement, and there's no question of niches become less popular. They're in great demand. So I hope you will approve such applications. For family niches of CPC, of course, if you ask me, I would say that let's have one single unified system instead of two systems. But of course, CPC want to promote family values. But you have sworn brothers and sisters. There are also traditional Chinese family values. Why can't you be also relaxed about them? All right. I would ask the Secretariat to find out. You want to ask the Secretary to find out the restrictions imposed by FHD. We can do that, but it should be the job of the government. So, Deputy Secretary, can you find out what they are about and inform us later? Yes, we'll try to find out from FHD. The question is whether same-sex couples will be allowed to be to share the same niches. Well, for the 190,000 ordinary niches, well, this is already allowed. But for family niches, the Board of CPC has had a discussion. They are of the view that for the minority, the 30,000 family niches should be restricted to relatives of the same family. Okay, Ms. Siho. Of course, our family values would mean that things should be shared in the same family, but the family members should nowadays include same-sex spouses. For the sharing of lots and niches, you can look all the way back to the great-grandparents for the purpose of sharing a niche or grave space. But you know that what kind of documentation can you rely for the relationship that goes back so many generations ago? I hope you would just rely on the declaration by living family members. But this is not about financial interest, not about estate or financial benefits. But because a few generations ago, those deceased might not have any paper to prove their relationship. You know, there was also the question of a husband having more than one wife back then. And I have looked at the DOJ's law drafting guidelines. There's an amendment to F, and G and H will be added to the preamble preliminary. Why don't you take the opportunity to amend others as well? For example, C. For example, I really don't know the Chinese terms. Head of the Sanitary Department, Secretary for Chinese Affairs. You are going to move amendments to amend certain titles. Why do you want to leave a C as it is? Well, because people can trace the amendment history. So I'm just curious. The third question, actually, Mr. Yip Kwok Kim has asked the same question, and that is the donation, the beneficiaries of CPC donation. The original reference is to persons of the Chinese race, and now it's the community of Hong Kong, a particular sector of that community. How do you delineate that particular sector? But with reference to race or blood relations? So instead of race, what would be the line? Are you going to just cover ethnic minorities? Or do you want to do something like functional constituencies here? So what kind of objective do you want to achieve through the amendment? Well, actually, we can certainly consider the preamble in the cross by cross, but I'll ask the legal advisor to say something. Well, we don't have many preambles in our laws. Actually, I did ask the DOJ why certain amendments have not been proposed, and they said they want to keep certain terms for historical purposes. Yes, preamble is not commonly found in modern day laws, and they just want to keep this to know, to let people know the history and what it was in the past. Deputy Secretary, on the question of the ambit of donations, in the past, the reference was to the race. So we want to relax it so that it can be a charity for the benefit of the whole community or a particular sector of the community. So if a charity helps ethnic minorities, it can be a beneficiary. Well, if it covers ethnic minorities, then you just expand the scope to cover ethnic minorities. So, but a sector may or may not be with reference to race. Well, that's just an example. For example, a particular sector may mean, say, the elderly, the physically impaired, people suffering from a particular disease. These are different groups or sectors. So it can be for the benefit of the entire community or particular group or sector of Hong Kong. Charities serving these people can receive donation from CPC. We've completed the first round. I should be the next, but I will not ask my questions now. I'll let Mr. Wong Kok Heng to have a go in the second round first. Chairman, first question is about the fee for accommodating or for the accommodating an additional set of ashes. What's the fee for that? $200. For government niches, it's $140, and your fee is $200. There's a difference of $60. Can you align your fee with the government's? Ms. Low? The fee was introduced in 1996, and there has been no amendments, no changes to that so far. I can't answer the question why FEHD charged such a fee, but our fee has remained the same since then. Well, we may not have such details in the bill, but perhaps the CPC board should consider aligning your fee with the FEHD, because you are a statutory body, and there's no reason why you should charge a fee which is $60 more than the FEHD fee. Second question. How many columbaria are managed by CPC? Where are they? Government? There are 4 columbaria: Aberdeen, Chai Wan, Cheung Kwan O, and Tsuen Wan. Thank you.
你有4個範圍咧，我就想問一個問題啦。
Well, yes, that leads me to ask the next question. Some people have asked me this, but during the annual grave sweeping cemeteries, they have to go to different locations. They would like to move the niches of their family to one location. FEHD allows this. Can CPC allow such an arrangement? And that is if the family members of the deceased would like to relocate niches into one location. Please also address the problem of lowering the fee. For the question of relocation of niches, Ms. Low can supplement. There are people queuing up for vacated niches. Well, let me supplement what I mean, so as to avoid misunderstanding. So let's say a family has a niche in Chai Wan and another one in Aberdeen. They will give up the one in Aberdeen so that they can get another one in Chai Wan.
That can be done any time now already. We want to lift the ceiling on the number of sets of ashes. Now, what we want is that, say, if the ashes are scattered in 4 different cemeteries and they can group them together in one cemetery, then that can help. Well, this is the answer that I want. That can help with the family members sweeping the graves, and at the same time, more niches can be vacated or released for public use. I think that it is a win-win situation. So CPC, please consider lowering the fee for putting in an additional set of ashes. Because after all, you want to attract people to go by the approach I mentioned, right? I would just want to have a consistent fee level in the 2 systems. So can you answer that? With regard to the fees are set out in the rules. There is a schedule. If there isn't any revision, then it needs a legislative amendment. But we have to consider this, as what Ms. Lowe said. I know that the FEHD's fee level has remained unchanged for a long time, and the fee level also, to a certain extent, reflects the costs involved. If a fee has remained unchanged for a long time, while the fee reflects the costs involved at that time. And actually, the fee level of HD now doesn't exactly reflect the costs involved now. CPC has a different system, has a different way of doing things, and the remuneration package for staff is also different. And if the fee is determined based on the costs involved, so naturally the 2 fee levels may not be the same. So I have made my view known, so please consider, because after all, your chairman is the Secretary for Home Affairs. Second round, Ms. Sito, followed by Dr. Helena Wong. Well, Ms. Wong, I'll be very quick. Just now, I talk about the great-grandparents, the relationships between them. If they are buried separately and you want to group the ashes together, how will you deal with that? I hope that you can take a lenient approach in doing that. I would like to know how you are doing it now. Can you tell us, explain the situation? Thank you, CPC. We are dealing with the issue rather leniently. We want that to be done. If they can give us valid documentary proof, then we can allow for that. But if failing that, they can do a declaration saying that these are their family members, what kind of relationships they have, then we would accept that. Thank you. Ms. Sito, no further question from you? Well, it should be my turn, but then I will let Dr. Helena Wong have a go first. First round, 5 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Of course, we support relaxing the restriction. We know that there aren't sufficient columbarium spaces and niches. My question is, in relation to expanding the definition of relative, we want the definition to be as broad as possible, covering all sorts of family relationships, including those who have a live-in relationship. They are not married officially, but they are still the spouses, right? So are they covered? Same-sex cohabitants or heterosexual cohabitants? Are they covered? If they're not covered, then I don't think the amendment is catching up with the times. That's my first question. My second question is on the ownership of the grave space. Well, we talk about the non-exhumable lots here. The land use right, does it belong to the family who actually bought that lot? Say, for example, a family has 2 lots in Taiwan, CPC. Now, after the relaxation, for each niche, how many sets of ashes can be accommodated? You do away with the ceiling, right? So they can actually try to regroup all the ashes, and they can actually group all the ashes into one niche. And for the other niche, is it up to the family to deploy it, or are they allowed, say, to use the niche for people who will get deceased in the future? Or is it the case that the other lot will be vacated and released back to the CPC, who actually owns the second niche which is released? Well, please, I think the administration has answered the question, and please don't talk in a cocktail mode. Administration, if you have bought, say, a grave space, and the ownership belongs to the buyer or the family involved, but then the CPC has certain requirements with regard to the management. It's not that the buyer can do with anything they like on that plot. Now, for the first deceased person, the ashes has to be there permanently, and the ashes should not be relocated and then let somebody else in. So this is a basic requirement. Now, for that space, provided that the first deceased person's ashes or remains are still there, under the amendment, we would try as much as possible to allow subsequent deposit of remains or ashes. So the first deceased person's ashes or remains have to be there, right? It cannot be relocated to other places. It can only add on to that, right? Yes. Now, if, say, the owner has 2 lots, A and B, and they try to put all the ashes or remains into A, vacate B, then that can be done. But the buyer cannot do whatever he like on B, because lot B has to be released back to the CPC. Now, if you want more flexibility, why don't you allow them to sort of regroup and be flexible in what they do to these 2 lots? Now, perhaps the woman is in grave A and the man is in grave B, and now we group A and B together. Of course, they 2 passed away at different times, and then we regroup them and put them together, and for the lot B vacated, then that can be used for depositing the remains of the grandfather or the great-grandfather. So because you are allowing only addition of remains and not relocating the remains of the first deceased persons. Now, it would be very strange if the grandfather or the grandson's remains are put together, but then the grandfather and the grandmother's remains are not put together. I find it very strange. Now, graves form an important or headstones form an important part of the study on traditional Chinese society. Well, please don't talk in a cocktail mode, Chairman. You shouldn't speak in a cocktail mode. Well, Chairman, we're in Hong Kong, right? Can you guarantee that DAB members don't speak in a cocktail mode? Well, please don't digress. Please allow the government officials to answer my question. Well, because the translation and interpretation is really for public's perusal of the proceedings. So please don't speak in a cocktail mode. Well, thank you for reminding me. Please ask the official to respond to my question. I will give you an extra 25 seconds. Now, it's not that we don't allow the spouses to be buried together. Now, if that is done, the other lot should be vacated. we just don't want that somebody will resell some burial lot and make a profit out of it. That's not the intention of providing burial grounds. So that's why we have this requirement that the remains of the first deceased persons must be there, must be kept there. I think it's a requirement that straddles across the CPC and other public cemeteries as well. Next one, Dr. Kenneth Chen. I have two major questions. If you don't have the information today, can you supply the information later on? Can I refer you to the background brief prepared by the Electrical Secretariat? Earlier on, we said that we asked under the proposal how many more niches can be provided. Well, in paragraph 12, it says that there will be 30,000 niches to be provided in the next 2 years. So after the amendments, there will be this number of niches to be provided. That will be an extra 30,000 niches to be provided in the next 2 years. Is that true? Can you confirm that? And can you give us more information? How is the distribution like? Because under CPC there are 4 cemeteries now. And also I would like to know, when we talk about the provision of public facilities, traffic impact or assessment is an important matter or issue. Of course, we agree to the addition or provision of more niches, and demand often always outstrips supply. So that's why we have to deal with the private columbarium bill, and in Tuen Mun, the government is also making available new niches as well. Will extra pressure be posed on road networks if there are more niches to be provided? Do you have to discuss with the affected parties? In terms of planning, how does the government take into consideration the interests of the various stakeholders? Now, more niches will be provided. Can you provide us with more information on the pressure to be exerted on the traffic and other public facilities? Now, we will go to clause-by-clause scrutiny very soon. I have taken a quick glance. I would like to thank the legal advisor for doing a lot of work. And she has asked the Bills Committee on the private columbarium bill, and I've seen the reply made by the government. In the blue bill, the ashes doesn't cover, say, jewelry and gemstones and ornaments, synthetic materials made out of ashes. But I hope that, Chairman, you can appreciate that when we started discussing the private columbarium bill, we saw a trend, and that is some operators would try to evade the regulation by turning the ashes into jewelry and other ornaments. So we have taken a look at how to amend the definition of ashes to stop the operators from shirking their responsibility. For CPC, you may not have to worry about this issue too much because you don't want to turn the ashes into other products. Anyway, in responding to our legal advisor's questions, can the government ask around a bit and so that you can align with the provisions in the other pieces of legislation. And also, you can please take a fresh look again at the definition of ashes, and you may have to revise the definition. Well, let me deal with the question of supply first, and then I'll defer to the legal advisor on the definition of ashes. First on supply. We are going to make some relaxation. We would facilitate addition of ashes, and we would make it more easier for the family members to add in extra niches, extra ashes.
It's difficult to estimate the additional numbers accommodated. As for the increase in supply, if laws are properly managed, they will have more land for columbaria. So there will be new construction projects in the future. We expect that in the coming few years, 2018, we are going to have 8,000, and also another 29,000, so more than 30,000 niches. As regards impact to residents and traffic, if we just look at the impact of the relaxation measures, the impact will not be big. Well, for new niches, they attract more traffic, but for older niches, the traffic generated is lower. So if we allowed more sets to be deposited, the traffic so generated may not be high. We have to do all the necessary assessments and also local consultation before we implement the new measures. You have done all the assessments, in other words? Well, for different projects, they are at different stages. For some, it has been done. For some other, it will be done. Can you provide us with information for reference in the future? Last follow-up question. Maybe I can provide you with the relevant information concerning whether a public consultation has been done and how many niches have been will be involved. On the definition, legal definition of human remains, there's a definition of ashes. In the private columbarium bill, we know that the definition is a little bit different from what we are seeing here, because the two ordinances are dealing with different facilities. One is a public sector facility, or one is about CPC cemeteries and columbaria. I don't think your aspirations and wishes can be met fully. So maybe I should ask my questions. I'm also going to use just 5 minutes. First, the proposed adjustments are welcome. I'm concerned about the cremation of unclaimed remains. Please tell us the procedure. In FEHD cemeteries, if you do not disinter after 6 years, cremation will follow. And for CPC, the term will expire after 10 years. Are you going to cremate the remains immediately after you have disinterred the remains? And if after cremation, are you going to charge a fee if the family subsequently wants to claim the ashes? Well, we'll talk about the principles, and Ms. Low will tell you more. For different lots, well, the term may be different, some for 10 years, some for more than 10 years. So if the term is not renewed and the term has expired and there's no disinterment, then CPC would try to contact the family. They will also publish notices in newspapers and the Gazette. And after disinterring the remains, they will only cremate the remains 6 years after that. So if they have to do the disinterment and to do the cremation, and then storage is required, costs are incurred. When the family members come forward to claim the ashes, a fee is payable. The government is going to increase the charge for cremation, $6,000. I think you should specify the charge first beforehand. We're talking about unclaimed remains. Let's say the term expires after 10 years and the family fails to disinter the remains. And we're going to place an advertisement and a notice in the Gazette. And then we would do the disinterment. There's a charge payable, and then we would store the remains. The monthly storage fee is $50. Let's say after storing the remains for 6 years, and after publishing newspaper notices and Gazette notices, and still they are not claimed, we can cremate the skeletal human remains. So when someone comes forward to claim the ashes, there will be a charge. Do you charge $50 per month after cremation? Yes. That's in Schedule 3. It's specified under Schedule 3. And there are also the lots with a 10-year term, which is renewable. And if the family fails to renew it, of course, there will be prior notice. And after the term expires, we are going to do the same procedure, notices, cremation. How much is charged for cremation? For the skeletal remains to be cremated, how much is charged? It's charged at cost. How much is it now? In the rules, cremation charge is not specified.
成本意思因為華永會唔可以自己去火化呢啲骨殖嘅，佢都係送去火化。咁所以按成本意思，即係譬如攞去食環署上次收佢嗰個錢，係咪收翻？
咁而家幾錢咧？
而家火
The CPC cannot do it itself. They will have to go to send it to a crematorium. It's $3,000, but cremation of skeletal human remains is lower than the cremation of a body. Second round, Dr. Helena Wong. Well, I haven't got clear answers to previous questions. I was asking some questions about heterosexual cohabitees and homosexual cohabitees. Are they also relatives? Let's look at niches. They're ordinary niches, which account for the majority of the 200,000 niches, 190,000 to be exact. If you want to deposit additional sets of ashes, as long as the first deceased ashes are still there, and the family member pay the relevant fee, you can deposit an additional set or additional sets. But there's no requirement on the particular relationship between the the first decease and the subsequent decease, whether they are sworn brothers or neighbors, whatever, as long as they think that it's appropriate. So even non-relatives are allowed, correct. But CPC also has family niches. Out of the 240,000 niches, we're talking about 36,000, or more than 10% of the total, because CPC, the board of CPC, also has the mission to promote family values. So for additional sets to be deposited into a family niche, then they will have to come under the definition of family members or relatives. We have relaxed the definitions. We can trace back a few generations back, or they can be related in a horizontal sense. For family niches, they are still subject to the regulation of the definition of relatives. Do the families know that the niches are ordinary or family niches, or family lots and ordinary lots? Well, they know, because the cost is different. Whereas a family member who has been in a niche of the CPC, I have been visiting the niche for years, but I don't know whether it's an ordinary or family niche.
拜山邊個位係家族，邊個唔係家族，邊個可以加嗰個。
And how do you know whether there's a family member or relative? How can one tell? Well, you may not know during normal times, but when you want to submit an application, you will have to refer to past records. So when you have to complete the formalities, the relevant family would know what is and what is not a relative. Can you tell us the distribution of the niches? For example, for this row, they are all family lots or niches because you use Chinese characters. Or for this particular quarter, they are all family niches. What about grave lots? Grave space? Well, for a grave space, they differ only in respect of the term. Only niches are categorized as ordinary or family niches. For grave space or lots, there's no distinction of ordinary and family lots. I can certainly deposit ashes into a grave space. Would the definition of relative apply? Yes. If you don't relax the definition of relatives, then if you want to deposit additional sets of ashes into a grave space, the definition of relative will apply. Well, we are relaxing the definition. We are not imposing a new requirement or new restriction. Yes, I welcome the relaxation. I'm just asking whether you can further relax it a bit, because in this day and age, relationship can be very varied and diversified. I just want you to be less exclusive. Although your amendments are already making the definition more inclusive. Because under our law, we don't have any particular legislation on cohabitees or spouse of different kinds.
I'm sure that the government has heard your views. Chairman, he hasn't answered my question. I've got another question which goes unanswered, and that is about the ownership. Well, third round perhaps. I will give you a third round. We do have time. Don't worry. It's my turn in the second round. Two members have asked the same question in the first round about the use of the phrase benefit of the community of Hong Kong or a particular sector of that community. If you word it in the way you did, then that means that you don't have any restrictions at all in your donations. Well, so as long as say you can donate to say the whole clan, right? So if you draft it in this way, there may be some gray areas. I understand what you want to do, but your intention is not fully reflected in the drafting. So please take heed of our views. Go back and reconsider this. Second, you said that you are relaxing the definition of relative this time. I don't think the relaxation goes far enough. You said now under the present law is the relevant persons, sisters, brothers, spouse, father and mother. And now you are relaxing it to cover also the married women. Would you be going a step further? Will your revised definition meet with the community's demands? I have cousins. I consider my cousins to be my close relatives. Could those be covered as well? Now, people don't have many children these days. If you can relax the definition to cover the cousins as well. If you can't do it this time, can you consider further relaxing the definition further? Well, can you cover, say, the cousins of the fraternal cousins, and maybe as a next step, the maternal cousins as well? And also the husband of the maternal cousins, the in-laws. Thank you, Chairman, and the members' comments on the community of Hong Kong or a particular sector of that community. Perhaps we have not been very clear in our wording, so we can go back and take a look again and see if there is a need to make it clearer in our drafting. I understand your comments, and I can't give you a ready response now. Perhaps we can go back and take a look. I think we share the same goal. We want to cover as wide a sector as possible. So I have another question. Recently, I have received certain cases that may not be related to CPC. There may be ancestors who died a long time ago, the grandparents. In their death certificate, the names were written down wrongly. And the descendants would like to disinter the remains, but then they can't do so because of the misspelling or a typo in the name. So what can they do? Well, of course, they know that the grave space is there, but then they can't disinter the remains the human remains because of the typo in the death certificate, what can they do? Well, in effect, there are indeed many applications which involve names which are different on the tombstones and the death certificate. So we ask them for documentary proof. If that can't be provided, that they can do a declaration, make a declaration to say that this is the grave, indeed the grave of the ancestor. Now, would that be a problem if you accept the declaration? Of course, they should try their very best to retrieve information. If they can't do it, then if they go by a declaration, then we will accept that declaration as proof. Please deal with these cases carefully. Dr. Lena Wong, 3 minutes. I'm sorry, I have so many questions. I think this is quite a complicated issue. As I said, we should minimize the restrictions so that the users and the descendants can have the greatest flexibility in regrouping and relocating the ashes or remains in the niches and the grave spaces. You said that the first deceased person's remains must be there first. I agree that the niches and the grave spaces should not be turned into commodities for reselling after the amendment. This I agree. But under that principle, can more changes be introduced? Now, if the first deceased remains is relocated to another lot, can the person keep that original space for burying relatives' remains? Now, say if this is a husband and wife, one is buried in A and the other is buried in B, and then there is a new additional need, and our family members' bodies has to be buried. So can B be the husband's remains in B be relocated to A, and then the B lot can be vacated for burial by for the family member? Well, they actually bought 2 lots. Shouldn't they be allowed to regroup the remains and then still retain the ownership of the 2 lots? Now, as long as they meet the definition of the relatives, then they can be allowed to regroup the remains in whatever way they like. Well, now we will end up in a situation where the grandson is buried together with the grandpa, and the grandma is buried together with the granddaughter, and then the grandma is not buried together with the grandpa. Well, I understand what you mean. I think we should try to strike a balance. A couple may have passed away, and the descendants would like to bury them together. Well, they are now allowed to do so. Now, if they are buried together and that there is a lot vacated, can that lot be used for burying the bodies of a family member? No, they are not allowed to do so. I don't think there is a strong demand for that now. Now, remember, you said you don't want to turn the lots into commodities which can be resold for a profit. Now, going by the experience of CPC and also FEHD, we want the remains of the first deceased to be there, because by doing so, people tend to really put the family members' remains there together with the first deceased. Now, if we do it by the way you suggested, then there are greater incentives for people to turn the lots into commodities. Well, you still keep to the definition of relative. They are still subject to the definition of relative, right? Well, we are using a very broad definition of relative. They can go generations back, and also many more relatives will be included under the definition of relative proposed. Well, the people can now group the remains of the families together. Now, if they are allowed to do so, then why shouldn't they vacate some other lots for other people's uses? Well, they've bought the 2 lots themselves. Now, if you don't allow them the flexibility, then they would not have the incentive to regroup the remains together and then vacate the some other lots for putting the remains of their family members. Now, if the lot they vacate is going to be confiscated, then they don't have the incentive to vacate the lot. I want to achieve the objective you mentioned, i.e. to vacate more space. The approach you are proposing will be discouraging them to do so, to vacate the lots. So member, your time's up. 30 seconds for the government to respond, and then we'll go to the sit hold for the 3rd round. I think we are allowing them to put in additional sets of niche ashes. Now, if people would like to regroup or group together the ashes of the family members, well, they would already have done so. They can do so now. And I think allowing them to put in additional sets of ashes will be a better approach. And we don't want to run the risk of having the spaces turned into commodities and resold for a profit. 3 minutes for you, sit hold. Well, 3 minutes only, Chairman. I will be having a 4th round and 5th round. Well, you shouldn't do it like what the FC is doing. Now, if you just allow me 3 minutes, and I will have a go at the 4th and 5th round. I would like to follow up on Dr. Helena Wong's question as well. Now, the 2 ancestors' ashes are put into different locations, into different places, maybe one in Taiwan and then the other in Wahab Shack. Of course, they would like to group the ashes together. Now, if they pay to buy for a niche, and if they are going to vacate the niche, would there be any economic incentive to encourage them to vacate the niche? If there is no economic incentive, well, they may prefer to go to 2 different places to sweep the graves. I think this is something that should be considered by the government and also the CPC. People would not be willing to vacate or release the lot if there is no economic incentive. Well, CPC, do you have any response to my suggestion? Ms. Low. Let me add. Why do we have to keep the first deceased person's remains in the grave? Because we have to have this first deceased remains first before we can determine whether any subsequent deposits of ashes are really from persons related to the first person, first deceased. If people choose to group the ashes of their ancestors in different locations together, they can do so. If they choose to hand over, say, 1 lot in, say, Zhangge Bay, then we would sell off that lot to those in need. So we want to take this opportunity to provide more space for burial. Would there be any economic incentives to encourage people to hand back or hand over their lots? CPC. Well, under the law, it is set that they should hand over the sites with no condition, and people know this. I hope that the government and the CPC can consider this. You used to have a maximum number of sets of ashes allowed, and now you would like them to hand over the space. And if you have economic incentives, then that will encourage people to do so.
Other members? Dr. Helena Wong? I'm not asking questions. When will this meeting end? 6:30. I want to make some suggestions. There should be detailed studies on how to increase the provision of grave space and niche, and to prevent speculation. And the government is saying that that's all we can do. I hope there should be a detailed study to offer more options and flexibility. I don't think your proposals are flexible enough. There's no incentive to encourage people to relocate ashes or to consolidate remains in different grave spaces. I can ask you 100 questions. You should have conducted a study first. Government response? Well, we want to make better use of land already available. Dr. Wong's proposals are, of course, some of the possibilities that we can consider. So if the husband and the wife are buried in different cemeteries, well, they can certainly have a common burial ground by moving one to join the other. This is already the procedure adopted by CPC. And now with this bill, we would allow them to deposit more sets of ashes. And we are going to cancel the maximum number of sets that can be deposited. And we have expanded the definition of relatives so that it's easier to share the lots or niches. If we allow the remains to be exhumed and then the lot be used for the depositing ashes, that may not be the best way of using land available. CPC may wish to supplement if the coffin is disinterred, and then there may be niches for human skeletal remains, or they may be the remains may be cremated instead of using the vacated lot for depositing ashes. So we believe this is the right balance. We encourage people to make the best use of the land available, and that's what goes behind the current set of proposals. Mr. Yu Si Wing. I think the bill presents a very good way forward. We want to release more niches for better utilization. I think one of the purposes of tabling this bill is to increase the supply. I don't know whether this question has been asked. After the necessary new arrangements are put in place, how many more niches will be made available by CPC? I wonder if anyone has asked this question. And to what extent can the new arrangements benefit Hong Kong? And there's a suggestion of taking back the vacated laws or niches and an incentive is provided. I think the government may be concerned that it may lead to speculation or illicit arrangements or creating gray areas leading to other irregularities. But if you are not expecting a lot of people doing this, well then I would agree that there's no need to tinker with the rules so much. Niches are very pricey, and there are people speculating on niches. So how can you say that you expect not many people to do this? You want to make more niches available. Do you have data that you can tell us for analysis? For the relaxation in respect of definition of relatives, we're talking about 80,000 lots, 240,000 niches, which will benefit from the relaxation of rules or concerning the depositing additional sets of ashes. Who would make use of the new arrangement? We haven't got any statistics or projection. We can tell you more specific data concerning the additional niches made available, and that they will be made available through the CPC's land management measures by recovering lots with expired terms and other land available. So we can tell you the additional supply in terms of number of niches and how many of those would exhume the coffin, and then the space will be used for other purposes, for additional sets of ashes. Under current rules, the first deceased is not allowed to be relocated or exhumed, and other arrangements made. After the relaxation is implemented, we don't know how many people will be making use of the arrangements to exhume the remains and use it for other permissible purposes. But there are different types of lots subject to different rules. We have exhumable, non-exhumable, and subscriber laws, which are subject to different rules concerning reuse. For lots which are being used for burial sites for the deceased, then the relatives would consider the need to be respectful and or to make it convenient if they visit the graves. or they may consider other alternatives such as auxiliary niches or lots or niches after cremation is done. Thank you. I cannot extend the meeting time. Mr. Chen Chi-Chin, from the discussion we have had, government officials insist that the first deceased, either ashes or remains, would have to be there, cannot be relocated because of concern of speculation in the black market. Have you discovered any case of speculation in the black market? Because it's, according to the replies, it seems to be a looming problem. And how many urns will be allowed? It's difficult to monitor how many urns are inside. But what about the tablet or headstone? Are you going to check the tablets? There are two questions. Because the first deceased must remain in the lot or ashes. There's no illegal resale. And I'm not saying that many people are eager to try, because this is not what we are proposing. But when it comes to day-to-day management, for example, cross-checking the name of the deceased, and also to make sure that the ashes will not be switched, I'll defer to CPC. When the set of ashes is deposited, our staff will be there to oversee the entire process. If it's in an urn, the name is there. We'll check the name, and then the urn will be deposited into the space, into the niche. And when it's sealed up, our staff is also there to oversee it. And annually, we would do some random checks. We random check a certain number of niches and grave slots, to make sure that they are properly maintained. If you have such a procedure, even if the first deceased is removed, you are not going to see any black market created or speculation encouraged. So there's no cause for your concern that you just said, if you have such a system in place. Oh, Mr. Chen has got a point. Even if there's a resale, if the condition is that you can deposit an additional set of ashes, but you have to share it with someone unknown to you, I think the attractiveness of such an offer will be much lower. But if it's an empty one, which you can use for your relative, I think the question is about emptying the lot or the niche to make room for a relative. Well, it can be very remotely related and a few generations apart. Well, you have the verification process, either through making a declaration or doing checks. So is it going to be something that would encourage speculation? I think I have stated my position clearly. Let's say that this is my third round. I'm talking about my personal opinion. I have concerns. If the first deceased is no longer there, and I say that's a custom on the fraternal side or maternal side, you can sell it to a relative. Can you prevent this? If you may want to pay a visit to your father's lodge, but not to an aunt's. You want to promote harmony of family. You want to maintain the tradition. You want to require the first decease is always there, because you want to prevent speculation and resale among family relatives, and not just among to outsiders.
Chairman, I would like. I have attempted to explain. Well, for an ordinary niche, there is no requirement on the relative or being. So if the first deceased can be taken away, then I don't know how we can regulate. Now, among the 240,000 niches, 190,000 of them are ordinary niches. I'm focusing on the family niches. I try to explain that if the first deceased is there, and we have greater confidence that it will only be the family members' ashes will be added. So if we have this requirement, then there would be a very remote chance that people who are not family members whose ashes are being added to the niche. Any other question? Well, I'm in a hurry to rush off to another meeting. I support holding a public hearing to listen to more views from users and members of the public. I will leave some time to talk about this subject. Members, would you consider inviting public views on the bill? Dr. Wong said that she supports the idea. Other members supportive of the idea? Yes. Now, the Bills Committee will post a notice on the Legislative Council website and issue invitation letters to the 18 district councils. Ms. Sit Ho, I would suggest that we do it after the election of the district council. Now, the 13th of November, that will be before the election. That would be the incumbent district councillors would be too busy. And, well, let's wait after the election before we hold a public hearing. In our table, we said that we would like to hold a public hearing on the 27th or the 28th. I'm not here on the 27th. Let's see what others think. Well, you aren't available yourself on the 27th either. I will be having a meeting next door only. I can come to this meeting room every now and then. While 4 members will be attending the Environmental Affairs Panel meeting. Now, after the meeting, we will seek your views on the dates. Yes, I've heard your view. So let's see how it goes. Date of next meeting we'll fix that afterwards. AOB, if no AOB, meeting adjourned. Thank you.